New college football AP Top 25 poll is out after we capped off week 12 of the season. Here's a look at your new top 10 teams. No huge change at the top. Worth mentioning, though, Oregon remains #1 and has officially clinched a spot in the Big Ten title game that is on CBS this year. Oregon got the close win to Wisconsin yesterday. Most notable, though, you'll see BYU undefeated no more. They fall out of the top 10 after their loss to unranked Kansas. Georgia is back in the top 10 after their win over Tennessee, while the Vols fall the most this week, but still claim that 10th spot. A look now at 11 through 20. No major changes other than, as we mentioned, BYU falling. They claim the 14th spot. You'll see Boise State there at 12. They're ahead of both Colorado and BYU, would be the top teams in the Big 12 right now. South Carolina makes its way into the top 20 as they claimed a 34-30 win against Missouri. And a look at the rest of the teams that do round out the new AP Top 25 poll. You'll notice Kansas State, LSU, Louisville, and Missouri all out of the top 25 rankings. Washington State still in it at 25. We're going to dive into all of this and so much more as we welcome you into our CBS Sports HQ studios. I am Jordan Giorgio alongside Leger Duzable and Brad Crawford joining us from afar. Let's go ahead and start with BYU falling, okay? Yeah. Were we giving BYU, you guys, a little too much credit? That SMU win that they had seems like forever ago. That Kansas State win is starting to look worse and worse. How are we processing at this moment this BYU team? Yeah,
I think it's hard to win week in and week out. And yes, Jordan, they were muddling around the line of potentially losing the last couple of weeks. You talk about that Utah game the week before. If not for I'm going to go ahead and say it, a bad call, they probably lose that game versus Utah as well. So this is a team that you have to give them credit for winning every week because Brad and Jordan, we know this, it's hard to win games week in and week out. It's hard to go undefeated no matter who you're playing, especially when you're playing guys in your conference. But they, again, were flirting with losing the last couple of weeks. You see it right there, the Utah game, the UCF game, that Oklahoma State game. Like, they were on the brink of losing all of those games, and it finally came and bit them. But a lot of people were surprised that it came and bit them at home versus a Kansas team that essentially hasn't went out to become
with fire within its conference season. And, you know, 3 close wins in the final seconds. Last week was able to beat Utah on that late field goal. Finally, it came back to haunt BYU, and they lost to a Kansas team that we said last week is starting to streak now with Jalen Daniels at quarterback. The good news for BYU is this, though. 7 spots fallen in the AP Top 25. I do not think the selection committee, the playoffs, is going to drop them 7 spots. I still think BYU will be inside the top 10, might be number 10, but BYU still in good position if the Cougars win out and win the Big 12.
You agree with that?
No way, Brad. I mean, you got to think this is a Kansas team with a losing record. They lost this game at home. I think the committee will consider, like you talked about, even though they were winning games, they were playing with fire these last couple of weeks, right? Again, if a call doesn't go their way on a pivotal 4th down versus Utah, they lose that game last week. Now, potentially, we're looking at 2 losses for BYU. But it went the other way. They were able to kick that field goal late and win that game. But when you lose to a team that doesn't even have a winning record, like, there has to be some payment for that, right? It's not like they lost to a team that's ranked and they barely lost. Just like we saw, and we'll probably talk about this later, Tennessee losing to Georgia. Like, they probably won't fall out of the top 12 because that was a close game at the end. Yes, you know, Nico fumbles the ball late in the 4th quarter. The game was essentially already over. But this, Brad, was a team they lost to in Kansas that doesn't have a winning record. So, again, people had already kind of scoffed at their schedule or lack thereof when it comes to playing a competitive schedule because the Big 12 has had an up and down year in regards to there's really no true alpha in the Big 12. And then, again, it's the SMU game is a big win for them, but it was so earlier in the season when Kevin Jennings essentially wasn't even the starting quarterback at the time. So I think the committee will fault them for this loss against Kansas at home, losing in the way that they did.
Well, maybe not a winning record, but have won 4 in a row. They're kind of breaking hearts left and right.
Yeah.
And, you know, they'll see Kansas, I'm talking about here. We'll see Colorado next week.
Man,
and the Buffaloes better be careful because Kansas still has something to play for, and that's bowl eligibility.
Correct.
So we will see Tuesday. Brad, if you're correct, or maybe if you're correct, Lige. Let's move on here. You alluded to it, the big game in the SEC yesterday. It was Tennessee and Georgia out in Athens. The Dogs, you know, we saw them take down #1 Texas earlier in the season. They now beat Tennessee. Are you sold that Georgia right now has the best resume in the SEC right now?
When you talk about the teams they've played, yes, because they've had like the hardest schedule, but I'm not sold on Georgia at all. It's because they have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde at quarterback, right? When you talk about Carson Beck, like, yes, he looked really good yesterday versus Tennessee, but let's not forget, let's go back to the Ole Miss game. Looked abysmal in that game. Let's go back to the first half versus Bama. Looked really bad that game and then had some big throws late, but then ended up having that costly turnover at the end of the game. So the thing is, what Carson Beck are we going to get for the rest of the season when you talk about this Georgia Bulldog team? Now, again, you look at the resume. The win at Texas was massive. The win versus Tennessee was massive. But they also played 2 other top teams, and they lost those games. The Ole Miss was a convincing loss, right? And the Alabama game looked like it was going to be a convincing loss, and then Carson Beck went on this crazy streak and got them back in the game. And ultimately, you know, Ryan Williams and Jalen Milroe decided to put that game to bed. But what Georgia team are we going to get, Jordan? Now, we know their defense is going to show up week in and week out, but I don't trust the quarterback right now.
Yeah, Brad, are you on the same page with Lige here? Are you not sold that the turnover issues aren't going to be a problem from here on out for Carson Beck and company?
If Georgia had a strong running game and the offensive line was playing better than it is right now, I wouldn't be worried about Carson Beck. However, Georgia at times is one-dimensional, and you can only ask that defense of Kirby Smart's to do so much. Played well enough in the second half last night to beat Tennessee. I think right now, Jordan, you're looking at 2 fan bases, Georgia and Tennessee. Tennessee fans, I think, should be a little bit worried because that's probably going to be a 10-2 team. But will the committee take a 5th SEC team, or is an 11-1 Indiana and 11-1 Penn State going to get that bid? And then you have a 4-4 situation. So Tennessee had a chance last night to really punch its ticket, I think, in my opinion, to the playoff. But, man, they really struggled offensively. And Georgia, however, now has a couple elite wins. And I think Georgia, as long as they went out and beat Georgia Tech here in a couple weeks, they're going to be in.
Can I tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a 5th SEC team in there, though. We'll wait and see. But that's a great point, Brad. All right, let's get to the ACC here. Clemson got a huge win over Pitt. If you look at their remaining games left, Brad, they play Citadel and South Carolina. Is there a path for Clemson to stay alive here?
Clemson does not control its own destiny in this playoff picture. I think if they finish 9-3, even with 2 good wins, blowing out Citadel and beating a pretty good South Carolina team, I think Clemson's a top 20 team. They have to have Miami lose another game. Miami's going to be a double-digit favorite the next 2 weeks as well. So right now you have 3 teams still kind of competing for those 2 spots in the ACC, but you see it right there. I mean, Miami has a pretty much cakewalk unless Syracuse and Kyle Ford are able to win that game inside the Carrier Dome. I really think we're going to see SMU, Miami square off in Charlotte here in a couple weeks. And I think I've been saying it for a month now. The ACC is going to be a 1-bid playoff league, and the winner of that SMU-Miami game here in a few weeks is going to the playoff.
Yeah, Brad, I agree with you. I think when Miami ended up losing that game 2 weeks ago, that's what literally put the nail in the coffin for the ACC and potentially having 2 teams. Clemson doesn't control their own destiny, and I'll take it a step further. I don't think they're going to win that South Carolina game. I mean, I don't think there's a hotter team in football right now than South Carolina. And we're talking about teams that could potentially get in at the back. And a lot of people are saying South Carolina, right? If they finish their business, right, they have an outside chance to potentially get in, which is crazy to think about, Brad, right? A 3-loss SEC team potentially getting into the playoffs. I'm looking forward to Miami and SMU in that conference championship game. I think not enough people are talking enough about SMU. They are one of the most complete teams in all of college football. And yes, I know they had a really close game versus Boston College, but you know this, Brad and Jordan, when you have a quarterback change, sometimes you get a bump of energy, and that's what happened with Boston College. But when they needed Kevin Jennings in that offense to make plays at the end, when they needed that defense to come away with a crucial sack, 4th down, backed up with Boston College driving the football. They were able to do that. So when you talk about a complete team, offense and defense and special teams, SMU is one of those top teams. I think they need to stop being disrespected. They are going to be a sleeper when it comes down the stretch and potentially getting into the college football playoffs.
All right, we're just getting started here with the college football playoff talk.
Welcome inside our New York studios. Brent Stover alongside Kevin Carter, Beanie Wells as well, wrapping up the 12th Saturday of the season. You look at the college football playoff bracket, a couple of teams not on here that were on the outside looking in that could sneak onto this particular graphic would have to be Georgia, which got a huge win against Tennessee. SMU was able to withstand Boston College. So overall, including those two results, you look at the teams with a green check mark, obviously were able to get wins. You're looking at red X's. Those were the teams that lost. Beanie, take it away as we start to look ahead to this Tuesday and the next rankings.
Obviously, BYU loses, so I think they drop in the rankings. I don't necessarily think they get out of that 12 spot, but I most certainly believe SMU climbs in this thing, and they probably get to 12. When you look at SMU, they have an opportunity to control their own destiny. The only team in the ACC that doesn't have a conference loss, so I think you have to respect them moving forward next week, putting them in that position. So it's going to get quite interesting as we get down the stretch.
Kevin?
To your point about the ACC, I think the Big 12 also falls in this category. I think the committee is telling us that we're going to have singular representation from those two conferences due to strength of schedule, and their contenders are all basically on the outside looking in. But you see that singular representation. This is one Big 12 team. This is one ACC team, right? And you see Big 10, SEC, and who are the rest of them? They're all in the Big 10 and SEC except for Boise State, who's the group of five kind of carrying the torch for the group of five teams, and independent Notre Dame, okay? That's what we need to see. In terms of rankings and bracketology, these things are different. This is what the bracket would look like, and I think it's giving way for those SEC teams that are contending for a title, as well as the teams that are contending in the Big Ten. The dominoes are kind of left by the remaining games on the schedule. Indiana plays Ohio State, okay? Penn State is kind of waiting to see who wins out of that. We have a difference of opinion to see what's going to happen to Penn State should Indiana end up beating Ohio State and getting to the Big Ten championship game against who we think will be Oregon.
To your point, we could end up with 4 Big Ten teams. Obviously, there's 4 in the bracket at the moment. It could work itself out. Maybe 3 teams. Oregon probably going to stay at 1, right? They had to grind it out, but Texas really had to grind it out against Arkansas as well.
Yeah, so I can see Texas potentially dropping a little bit. And I do really believe that there will be 4 Big Ten teams in this thing right here. When you look at the quality of wins, when you look at the style of play, I think the committee certainly respects the Big Ten Conference as well as the SEC. And I don't see any way you could put Penn State out of this thing if they continue to just win the games that they're supposed to win.
Beanie Wells, Kevin Carter, I'm Brent Stover. Fantastic stuff as we look forward to Week 13. Again, Tuesday will be the CFP rankings, the very latest. And right here on CBS Sports Network, Adam Zucker and the guys with Inside College Football. So long for now.
This week, Notre Dame taking care of business, Alabama taking care of business, Ole Miss off. Georgia going to get into the bracket now because, of course, you're going to have Boise State as the 12 seed in the bracket because they're the highest ranked group of 5 champion as projected. So Georgia will be in the playoff field come Tuesday. CBS Sports HQ, built by the Home Depot, how doers get more done. Back here with 2-time Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden, and welcome in 24/7 Sports college football analyst Brad Crawford. Tennessee and Georgia dominating our conversation here, Brad. And BMAC thinks that now 6 teams, if they all win out, those 6 teams, and I'll name them for you: Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. They all win out. They're all getting in. Your thoughts?
Now, I think the SEC is getting 4 teams in the playoff, Hakeem, and it'll be 5 if one thing happens. If Penn State or Indiana is left out at 11-1, that's the 5th spot for the SEC. But right now, if Penn State and Indiana both finish 11-1 and get into the playoff as at-large teams, as the 3rd and 4th Big Ten teams, then you're going to have Tennessee or Texas at 10-2 being left out. Now, I say that if A&M beats Texas, but there's no chance 6 teams get in from the SEC. I think 4 right now is going to be the number.
Well, I see it like this, Brad, and I think this is going to be a great back and forth. And understanding the dynamics in the SEC. So this is the hypothetical that I just laid out, right? I think it's safe to say if Georgia wins out, Brad, Georgia is in, correct? They got UMass, they got Georgia Tech, they're in. So if Georgia makes it, Alabama, they went out, they're in. You can't forget about Ole Miss. If Ole Miss wins out, Ole Miss beat Georgia. They're in. So if Texas wins out, they're in for sure. But even if Texas loses to A&M, when you look at a team that was ranked #1 in the country, right now I think they're top 3. If they lose to A&M, which would be considered a good loss, when you look at what A&M has done, I think it's hard for the committee to leave Texas out of the playoffs. The brand, the tradition, the pedigree, everything that's associated with Texas, not to mention this is a team that once upon a time throughout this year was considered the #1 team in the country. And as I look right now, I think they're top 3. I think that would be hard for them to fall from 3 all the way out the top 12. And if you're Tennessee, granted, Tennessee could be the odd man out, but they got a legit gripe because if Alabama makes it, guess what? Tennessee can have an argument. We beat Alabama, and the last game of the season, we beat Vandy, who beat Alabama. And right now, beating Vandy is considered a quality win when you look at how competitive they've been this season and when you look at their signature win, which was beating Alabama at home. So there's a lot when you talk about the turmoil, the chaos that will happen if all of those things takes place. But I get your point. 6 is a lot, no question. But if these things surface, A&M beats Texas, you're telling me they're going to leave a 2-loss Texas team out, but then you have a 2-loss Bama team make it? You have a 2-loss Georgia team make it as well? I don't know if that would stand. It's just hard for me to see that happen if A&M finds a way to beat Texas, a team that was once considered the #1 team in the country.
Brad, it does make sense. I mean, you can see how somebody would argue that on the committee.
If Texas loses to Texas A&M, the Longhorns do not have a single win this season over a top 25 team in the committee's rankings. Texas is getting left out at 10-2 if they lose at Kyle Field, and there's 4 or 5 other SEC teams getting in. I just don't see it happening, fellas. There's not enough at-large spots for 6 SECs to get in. Max would be 5, and I'm still sticking with my preseason projection of 4. I think it'll be Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and then Ole Miss. Tennessee's going to be that odd man out at 10-2.
So you said Georgia,
Alabama,
Bama,
Texas, and Ole Miss.
Texas, Ole Miss, right?
And then Indiana at 11-1 gets in over 10-2 Tennessee.
So let me ask this question, Brad. You said if Texas loses to A&M, they have 2 losses. Do you foresee Tennessee being a more valuable team to get into the playoffs with 2 losses over Texas?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they had that win over Alabama, and Texas does not have a quality win. Yep.
So maybe 5 teams then in from the SEC.
I mean,
so that might be what ends up happening.
Even if it's 5 teams, I feel like that is a surprise.
Yeah.
Because to Brad's point, most felt like 4 would get in from the SEC. But if they're able to get 5, I think that's the reality. I definitely believe that that's the reality when you look at the traffic jam of light teams, 2-loss teams. How many legit two-loss teams the SEC has that can make a case saying we're deserving of getting in because they've played each other. Bama beat Georgia, Tennessee beat Bama, Georgia beat Tennessee.
Heck, I'll make a case for South Carolina at 7-3 right now. They won 4 in a row. Like Shane Beamer it's Beamer ball back in Columbia. Like there are teams coming on. I'm not being obviously for real, but I'm just telling you, like this has been a season in the SEC that I can't remember one like this where there's so much parity. And this is the first season with no divisions. It's created absolute chaos.
Which is good. This is what we want.
Well, but what it allows now is you're getting a couple extra teams in a 12-team playoff, and then eventually one day we'll be 16 teams.
Yeah.
Just wait.
If SEC gets 5 in, you better believe they're trying to figure ways to add more spots.
Well, the Big 12 will be probably only getting in 1 team. Colorado controls its own destiny to reach the Big 12 title game. Well, yeah, the ACC. But we're going to
look at what they've done. Stopping opposing offenses, rushing attack. They've done a great job in doing so. being able to run the football, provide a sense of balance. They've done a great job in doing that. And most importantly, protecting Shedeur Sanders just a little better than what they've done in weeks past. Heck, going back to last year, they have done a great job in improving to protect their star quarterback. When you look at the playmakers they have, the talent they have, it's hard to overlook what they've done and what they could do moving forward. And they're just clicking at the right time. Mike Tomlin used to tell us all the time, when it gets close to playoff moments, two things happen. Either you're thriving or you're surviving. Colorado's a team that's currently thriving.
Yeah, they are. Next week, Colorado plays Kansas at Arrowhead in Kansas City, followed by their regular season finale at home against Oklahoma State as they control their own destiny. It is incredible what has happened in one season in Colorado. All right, let's take a look at Brad's top 12 teams. We know the third set of rankings are coming up on Tuesday. Brad, who do you have? Who's in your top 12 at this point?
Yeah, as long as BYU wins tonight, I think the top 6 remains unchanged, and then you have some changes. I think Tennessee falls to 12, replacing Georgia. I think Georgia moves up to number 9. You'll see Notre Dame and Miami move up. There's a chance that with Georgia's win over Tennessee, perhaps the committee puts Georgia at maybe 7 or 8, pretty much locking the Bulldogs in with 10 wins. But there's going to be some changes for sure. Penn State, Ole Miss, possible first-round game. That would be great in Oxford, home game there. Boise State at Ohio State. Right now, Boise State winning against San Jose State still has them in that G5 lock. But if Army beats Notre Dame next week and finishes unbeaten and then beats Tulane, well, then we're talking about the resume for Army being better than what Boise State has. Tulane's good, fellas. They've won 8 straight games, and Army plays them. So, and then Alabama, Indiana's another one. So there's some really quality first-round matchups coming up if this projected top 12 comes to fruition.
Any reaction to that, what you saw?
I think that's definitely feasible. I think that is a possibility. And Brad made a great point in terms of Army, because that is the next big game for Army and Notre Dame. Neutral site, if I'm not mistaken.
Yankee Stadium.
Yes, Yankee Stadium. If they somehow beat the Fighting Irish, number one, that would knock the Fighting Irish out of any playoff potential brackets. They would be done. But then what happens with Army when you look at the group of 5 play in Boise? Because to Brad's point, that win over Notre Dame in this hypothetical would trump anything that Boise has done, in my opinion, when you look at the entire structure of the season. So that could be something that when we were, because if you look at Army, Bryson Daly, when healthy, he's the Taysom Hill of their offense.
Yeah.
He's a physical runner, and guess what? They can throw the football. Just enough to make you respect it. So that is an intriguing matchup for Notre Dame, and I think it could be the biggest game on Notre Dame's schedule when you look at how we visualize their season panning out. The Army game might be the biggest game.
Brad, do you think if Army wins, because we're in a hypothetical, of course, but if Army were to win and match up against Tulane in the American title game, would that winner be ranked higher than a Boise State Mountain West champion? That's where I don't know. What do you say?
Yes, right now the committee does not respect Army's schedule, but that changes the next couple of weeks
if they beat Notre Dame
Stadium and then they beat Tulane, because Tulane's going to come into that game on like a 9-game winning streak. Only 2 losses this year came to Power 4 teams. So that would be 2, 1 top 10 win, 1 top 20 win. And then you look at Army's full body of work versus Boise State. I mean, Boise State's best win right now is, what, UNLV and Washington State. They have a quality loss. So I would, if I'm on the committee, I would put an unbeaten Army with wins over Notre Dame and Tulane over Boise State.
Well, we will have the third set of rankings here on Tuesday. Brad will be alongside. We'll break them down. BMAC will weigh in as well as we get closer and closer to the beginning of the college football playoff. We're just about a month away. First-round games are set for December 20th. Here's a look at the odds to win the national title. Ohio State plus 320.
Who has the most juice, you think? If you had to, not on any of the favorites.
Notre Dame plus 2,000. Notre Dame's a nasty team since losing to Northern Illinois. Their defense is nasty. Riley Leonard threw 3 touchdown passes today.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a team coming on. That's who I